Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. You are attending the Yahuwah Direct webinar. I am Ayana and I will be presenting to you today. Let us start with a word of prayer first. Ab Yahuwah, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for blessing us and providing everything that you do. Father, I would like to ask for a special petition that there are many wolves, some in sheep's clothing, some not so carefully concealed, that are ravaging your flock, that are scattering them abroad, that are pilfering from them. Ab Yahuwah, I ask in your Kadush name, Yahuwah Alo Ya'am, that these wolves, the group of them, the groups of them, be scattered themselves, that the gain that they have been able to obtain through lies and deceit and other works of evil, that those be scattered, that they be pilfered of the innocent goods and the innocent and naive workings and hard earnings of your sheep. I ask that they be sent in multiple directions and that they be sent away from your sheep. Father, I ask that this thing, if it's according to your will, be done very soon, fast, swiftly. Father, on a lesser intense note, I ask if you could please continue to imbue us with your knowledge, your word, the meaning, the wisdom, that we be able to apply it to our lives, that we be able to apply it to our children's lives and our friends and our family, and that they see the witness of you working in our lives and they too be enticed to live according to your word. We thank you, we praise you, we love you, and we ask for these things again in your mighty, powerful name, Yahuwah Alo Ya'am. Hallelujah. All right, so let us start with our statement scripture, which can be found in Yahuchanan chapter 14, verse 6. And it is, Yahusha said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one can come to the Father unless they come through me. That word way in Hebrew is direct, and it is found in Strong's H1870, and it means it's a road, figuratively a course of life or a mode of action, adverbally a journey, manner, or pathway. You can also find evidence of this word found in Mattithyahu chapter 19 verse 3. That would be Acts for those who are unfamiliar with the Hebrew names of the books and the scriptures. And they talk about that there was a bunch of clamor about the way, or in some scriptures it says about that way in Ephesus, and that way is actually what the apostles and followers of Yahusha called themselves. They were not called Christians. They were called followers of the way, or Ha-Direct. So let us continue on with the Hashema, which translated into English is the hearing. You can find this abbreviated version of it in Devarim, that would be Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. Shema Yasharal, Yahuwah Alo Ya'am, Yahuwah Akkad. Ahab Yahuwah Alo Ya'am, Labab Nefesh Ma'ad, Dabar Suah, Ya'um Labab. You shall love Yahuwah, your Eloah, with all your heart and with all your soul and with everything that is within you, or your strength. These words I charge you with this day shall be in your heart. So, just like last week, I have 2 videos for recommended supplemental viewing of these videos that we've been talking about. Today we'll actually get into chapter 23 of Mattithyahu. And for the past 2 weeks, this week included, we'll make it 3, we have been talking about chapters 22 and 23 in Mattithyahu. There are some things that are in the first 14 verses of chapter 22 talks about the parable of the wedding, the wedding that the king is having for his son. And that was not covered in this 3-part series, but it was covered in a separate video, which is called Wedding Customs in the Scriptures. And you can find that on the YouTube channel under Yahuwah Direct. And that will get in depth with that parable. We have finished chapter 22. Today we'll do chapter 23. And to see the conclusion of that, which will be found in chapter 24, you can also look at the video of the temple, the coming of the Messiah, and the end of the age, which will get in depth about what is being said there. So last week we talked about what Yahusha was saying to each party when they challenged him, those parties being the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Herodians. The week prior to that, we went into the background and the history and the foundational principles of each of these parties. And this week, we will conclude the 3-part series, and we will get into the 8 woes that Yahusha talks about in chapter 23. So, again, this is Showdown at the Temple, part 3. The 8 woes, and we will be covering Mattithyahu chapter 23. So again, just like last week, I kind of wanted to show you where Yahusha was speaking, which is very important. In chapter 23 of Mattithyahu, this is where Yahusha, he actually goes into describing the several different woes to the Pharisees and the scribes particularly. And the reason is because they were the party of major influence out of the 3 parties. And they were doing the most to persecute Yahusha for his overturning their traditions, overturning their misinterpretations of the Torah, and some of the practices that they held and that they did. So Yahusha, as you can see here, here's the court of women. Okay, you go up the stairs through the Nicanor gate. This is the court of the Israelites. And then past this would be most of your teachers, most of, the Sanhedrin, the different I don't want to say rabbi, but the different teachers with their followers, these were a strictly men-only quarters, okay? These hallways right here, all through here. And it is believed, well, I'll show you a little later. I won't get into that. But this is where they would meet and teach, and all different groups of men and their followers would be here in these areas here. So this is where Yahusha was. And it's important to remember that he's here, along here and along this hallway, okay, because he is very near the Kedusha place and the most Kedusha place, okay. And when he recants and he pretty much blasts the Pharisees for what they're doing in this chapter, it is a testimony because of of being near the most holy place. Okay, he's very close. As you can see here, that's very close. This is a witnessing of what is being done. He's witnessing against the Pharisees and the scribes over their workings. And it is being done pretty much in court. Court like judicial court. Although this is the court of the priests, but this is where Yahuwah is, and he sees what is going on. Although technically the Holy of Holies, or I'm sorry, the Kedusha, HaKadoshim was not there. The Ark of the Covenant was not there. This is a testimony against that party. And he did it right here. Not in a view of everybody in the public, all the other Yahudim. He did this with all the learned teachers, okay, and their followers. So that's important. So let us start with chapter 23, verses 1 through 3. Then Yahusha spoke to the crowds and to his taught ones, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, whatever they say to you to guard, guard and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. Now, what Yahusha is saying here is that the seat of Moshe is a seat of judgment and right ruling, and we'll get into that in a minute. What you see up here in the upper right-hand corner is an actual judgment seat. It was taken in the city of Nazareth, and it was near the gate of Dan. And the person, and let me say this, the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem was kind of synonymous to like the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. There were other Sanhedrins, okay? That was the ultimate Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. But there were other ones in different cities and different districts that were smaller Sanhedrins, okay? Kind of like the district ones, like we have district courts here and we have appellate courts here. Well, it's the same thing, all right? And that will come into play later, but I wanted to set that up now. Now, Yahusha is saying here that what they tell you to guard, so the feasts, watching out for the Sabbath, do the commandments, all those things were good that the Pharisees were saying, okay? But what they were doing by their actions was not good. And so he makes that distinction here. Now for the seat of Moshe. You can find these verses that I'm about to refer to in Shemoth, which is the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verses 13 through 16. And this is the origin of the seat of Moshe. And it came to be on the next day that Moshe set to rightly rule the people. And the people stood before Moshe from morning until evening. And when the father-in-law of Moshe saw all that he did for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit by yourself and all the people stand before you from morning until evening? And Moshe said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to seek Yahuwah. When they have a matter, they come to me, and I rightly rule between one and another, and make known the laws of Yahuwah and his Torah. Now, because the Pharisees sat on the seat of Moshe, it was their responsibility to make known the laws of Yahuwah and his Torah. Okay. Now the word Torah or Torah can be found in H8451. It means law, it means instruction, custom, or manner. But I would like to show you, there's a running theme throughout the last 3 webinars that I'd like to point out to you. Last week we talked about how when Yahusha was talking, the other groups would call him teacher. and that word teacher, with vowel pointing, it was Moshe, but without vowel pointing, it was Morah. No, it was Moray with vowel pointing, but without it, it was Morah. And here are the numbers, and it meant teaching and also to alter by cutting off, which is what he did when he corrected the bad teachings of each of the groups. Okay, and here's the root word to that. But I also pointed out that he was also the Ma'or, and by his teaching and pointing the way, he was a bright light. He was showing what is the right path. He was shining. He was letting things be revealed, which the root word is Aor. Same thing with the Torah. Okay, same thing. It means law. It means instruction, custom, manner. It points to the right way to live. It points to the right way to conduct yourself under the covenant of Yahuwah. It lights a path for you. All these words, the root word is here. Aur or aura or okay, or ur. Same thing, and all of these words has a same running theme. All right. So let us continue on in verses 4 through 8. For they lay heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their fingers they do not wish to move them. And they do all their works to be seen by men, and their tefillin wide, and lengthen their tzitzit of their garments. And they love the best places at feasts, and the best seats in the congregations, and the greetings in the marketplace, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your master, the Messiah, and you are all brothers. Just one moment. Okay, so the Pharisees and the scribes did a lot of things to get notoriety from men. All right. So some of those things were the tefillin, were the strips around their arm, as you can see here. They would make these strips wide so it was easy to see. Okay. So they could appear to be more pious looking. They would make their seats long so they can be noticed. And the bigger they were, it was attributed that they were more religious, more righteous, more pious. Okay. They also wanted to be at the feasts, and the best place to sit at the feast was close to the host, and you would sit, and this is the same for the congregations too, or in the synagogues. You would sit facing toward the crowd. So you would be sitting in an elevated position on a dais, okay, kind of higher up than the crowd, and you would be sitting next to the host, and you would be facing outward so everyone can see you sitting next to the host and getting preferential treatment. Okay. And when they went into the marketplaces, everybody gave them preferential treatment. They would call them Rabbi, Rabbi. They would entreat them, give them gifts and things like that. So this is what Yahusha is condemning. Now, on to the word Rabbi. There were three different offices, different titles of Rabbi, and we'll get into that in a second. But the practice of being titled Rabbi or Rabbi, which is probably more appropriate, was a pretty new practice that started in the days of Yahusha. Prior to that, no one was called Rabbi. Okay. The reason why that started is because the Pharisees were split into two main schools. One school, and the schools were named after each of the famous Pharisees. One was Shammai, and the other one was Hillel. And they had schools of philosophy. They would teach different philosophies of the oral law and of the Torah. Okay. And so in order to one up each other, they came up with the term rabbi. Now the word Rab, R-A-B, which you can see down here, it is not a Hebrew word. It is a Babylonian word, and it means master. Okay, so these men would give themselves, Shammai was actually the first one, would give themselves the title, their schools, their followers would elevate them with the title Rab, or Rabbi, meaning my master, or Rabbon, meaning our master. Okay, now Rabbon was only given to presidents of Sanhedrins, not just the central Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, but in the different districts too. Okay, so when a person was becoming a rabbi, they held a ceremony. Okay, and the ceremony that took place will put them on an elevated platform, kind of like the judgment seat, kind of elevated a little bit. Then members of the Sanhedrin, it doesn't matter whether it was your local Sanhedrin or the central Sanhedrin, would lay hands on the candidate and pray over them. Then the candidate was given a key and a book. The key was symbolic of authority and power to teach others. Okay, that candidate had permission pretty much to begin teaching others and to have disciples and followers. Okay, the book was a symbol of their diligent studying of the scriptures. And you can see there's an example when Yahusha gives Kepha the key to the Shamayim. When he gives Kepha the keys to the heaven, or the Shamayim, in Mattithyahu 16 verses 17 through 19, he is in essence giving Kepha the power and the authority to teach. All right. So this lets you know that, guess what? Yahusha had the ability, he was given the ability to teach and have followers. And you'll notice that in all of what's commonly called the four gospels, the four accounts of his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, no one disputes that he's a teacher. As a matter of fact, they call him that. They call Yahusha both Rabbi in Yochanan 1:38 and Rabbon, Yochanan 20 verse 16. Now remember, Rabbon means he was the president of a Sanhedrin. That was only given to presidents of a ruling body. I'm assuming it's a local one and not the central one. So that means that he was a recognized member, which is important. So let's move on to woe number 1, because there's actually 8 of them, and I did not cover them all because of time. It would be well over an hour if I went through all 8. I wanted to pull out, I think I have about 4, half of them that were pretty significant. They're all important, but I wanted to highlight the 4 that we're going to go through now. So the first woe, the reign of Shamayim, which can be found in verse 13 of chapter 23. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut up the reign of Shamayim before men. For you do not go in, nor, that should be an R, I'm sorry, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Now, because Yahusha's influence and his ministry was becoming so popular that there were people, and there were even members of the Sanhedrin that was actually believing in him, to hinder that, to hinder the right ruling and the right understanding that Yahusha had. The Sanhedrin began to threaten people who believed in Yahusha and believed in him being the Messiah. They began to threaten people with being kicked out of the kahals, or the synagogues, okay? And you can see there's two references to that, and you can see one in Yahuchanan chapter 9, verse 22, and the other one in Yahuchanan chapter 12, verse 42, okay? So he was saying, you don't want to enter, that's one thing. But then you hinder other people from getting a proper understanding of right ruling and the right application of Yahuwah's word. So that is woe number one. And remember, he's saying this in front of the sanctuary, in front of the holy place. So this, in essence, he is in court. Let's go back to the picture here. In essence, he is in court. He's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees. This diagram here. He is in court of the Israelites, okay? And he is testifying of the wrongdoings in front of the Kedusha and the most Kedusha place, in front of where Yahuwah would reside, okay? He's testifying against the Pharisees of what they're doing, okay? So that's woe one. Woe two, widow's houses, is in verse 14. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you eat up widows' houses and for a show make long prayers. Because of this, you shall receive greater judgment. Greater judgment doesn't mean better. It means more severe judgment. Now, for the widow house part, people who were the Yehudim, the Israelites, would go to the Pharisees for spiritual advice because, again, they're supposed to have the seat of Moshe. They're supposed to do right ruling and judgment, okay? So people would go and ask for spiritual advice. So if there was a dispute between two brothers about division of their father's property upon his death, or if a widow whose husband recently died needed advice on what to do with her husband's vineyard or her husband's house, and how she would handle the business, because they believed that the Pharisees were right ruling and had the seat of Moshe, they would go to them. The Pharisees in turn would direct the people to the scribes. Now the scribes were Pharisees, but they were the ones that were actually writing the scriptures. And so they had to have a very, very acute knowledge of Yahuwah's Torah, of his laws, okay? So when the Pharisees would recommend that the person or people would go to the scribes would then, using the law, instead of doing it the right way, they would incite people who were inexperienced or who were naive or ignorant of certain things. They would have them to entrust the property to them. Okay? And many times they would lose the property as a result of entrusting the property to them. Okay? So that is what Yahusha is saying about you eat up widows' houses. Okay? Now, for the long prayers. Now, these men, you pretty much what I just described is a con artist would swindle property and money out of someone. It's not supposed to be a righteous pastor or a priest, okay? But despite what they would do, then they would go, because praying time was 3 times a day. Okay, 9, 12, and 3. They would, to be, again, to appear more pious and more religious, the hour of prayer, like I said, was 9 a.m., 12 noon, and 3 p.m. They would take an hour before to meditate and then an hour after prayer to pray. So 1 hour 3 times a day turned into 3 hours 3 times a day. That's 9 hours a day. And people would say, oh, they are so, these men are so righteous. They're so set apart. They're so, kadosh. They're so, for lack of a better term, holy, because they must really hear from Yahuwah. But these men are straight up crooks. So this is woe number 2. Now this diagram that I have here, the first diagram showed the temple proper, which was just this intersection. But Herod's temple comprised of not only the temple buildings, but the outer buildings also. Now this that I have in this blue square here, this is the area that both the Sanhedrin would meet in. Also, this is the same area that Yahusha, he got rid of the people, the thieves in the temple, as a lot of people say. The people, the money changers and everything. He kicked everything out. But this is also the area where the scribes would meet people and give them legal advice. Okay? Outside of the temple proper, but still a part of the area. All right. People would come here. This building here is the actual council house for legal proceedings. All right. So people would come, Yehudi would come thinking that these men were righteous and pious and they knew the law and they knew the applications of the law, and would entrust them with supposedly doing right ruling, and these men would swindle property. All wrong, all wrong. So let's go on to woe 5. And this is about tithing, and it comes from verses 23 and 24. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. These need to be done without neglecting the others. So the problem that Yahusha has here is that these men are concentrating on ceremonial. It's not insignificant, but it's less significant than right ruling, than having compassion on people, and actually practicing belief in Yahuwah. They were so concerned with the ritualistic things and the small things, but let the big things go. If my memory is correct, the verse right after this says, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a whole camel. So you're so worried about the small things, you're letting the big things go right past you. Okay. So they missed the boat on that. Okay, they didn't display their belief, nor did they show their love to their fellow brothers and sisters, fellow Yehudi, by treating them the way that they were treating themselves. And the last woe that I'll go over today, there are 4 other ones, but again, I didn't want to go, too far over the time limit. Is woe 7. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Woe 7 is washed tombs, and you can find that in verses 27 and 28 in chapter 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly indeed look well, but inside are filled with dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly indeed appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. All right. So the tombs that were in Jerusalem, because it was important for all Yehudi, all Yehudim, to be clean, ceremonially clean upon entering the temple. One of the things they did to identify the dead, because the dead were considered unclean and touching anything dead was considered unclean. One thing that they did was to whitewash tombs with lime. So in the desert light, in the day of the desert, you would see these blindingly white buildings. And that would let you know that that was a tomb of a dead person. And to stay away, because if you defiled yourself, you could not enter into the temple. So he is likening that process of whitewashed buildings, the lime, with the outwardly appearance of the Pharisee. Okay. Again, if we go back, they're making long prayers, 9 hours a day. They're making sure that everything is tithed. All right. They are supposedly helping people by giving them spiritual advice and giving them legal advice. Okay. They are supposedly, have these high offices with titles. And they're supposedly, they've got all their garments, their proper garments as stipulated by Yahuwah. It all looks good. See, that looks good. But in reality, but in reality, they're filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness, and they are just as unclean inside as a rotting corpse or dead men's bones. Okay, and they're living outside of the influence of the Torah or of law. Okay, you can see the example of being unclean in Bed-Midbar, which is Numbers chapter 19, verse 18. And if nothing has changed, nothing about any of this has changed. And this chapter is a good measuring tool for those of you who are, in groups, those of you who are still within kahals, those of you who are looking for elders and things like that. Chapter 23 is a excellent chapter to use as a measuring tool, because you can measure what you don't want in your leader. Okay. You don't want somebody who's making a show of themselves, showing who are caught up in showing themselves to be righteous. Okay. By making their tefillin wide, making their seats long. Tefillin had verses on it. Okay. This wrap around the arm, this strap. It had verses written on it. Okay. And the phylactery had verses in it too, representing that Yahuwah's word is always on their mind. Representing Yahuwah's word is, they do Yahuwah's word through their arm, through their deeds. Okay. There are many pastors, preachers, whatever you want to call them, that do that. Do they physically have these things on them? No. But they always are displaying their expertise in the word, and they're knowing the word, not understanding the word, but knowing the word verse by verse, verbatim. Okay. Not understanding, but just knowing it. Okay. Showing how pious they are. okay, giving themselves elevated titles. And this is rampant throughout, not only throughout being Messianic or being Judaism, but Christianity. How many bishops, how many, senior this, elder this, doctor this. These are titles, and nothing has changed. Okay? They give themselves these fancy titles, and they give themselves fancy ceremonies. Not too long ago, there is a very popular pastor down in Atlanta who has been accused of pedophilia. And I saw a YouTube video of him being called a king. Now, it's not enough that this man is a senior pastor. It's not enough that this man is a bishop. He, along with some pseudo rabbinical guy, had him elevated upon a chair, picked up by 4 men on a chair, wrapped him around in a Torah scroll, or a supposed Torah scroll. I don't even know if it really was one, but it looked like one, and had him to be elevated as king. Nothing has changed. Okay. Again, because they don't want to understand Yahuwah's word truthfully, they also, and because they have elevated themselves, these false pastors and false elders and bishops and whatever else names that they call themselves, because they don't want to enter in, they don't want to enter and be obedient to the word of Yahuwah. They hinder men because they want men to follow them. So they veer men away from right ruling. Same thing. Nothing has changed. Nothing. They eat up widows' houses. They eat up people's money. All that tithing and all that. Eat them up. Okay. They make, in their services, they make great prayers. Some of them will bend down, and I'm sure we've all experienced the extra long prayer where you're thinking in your mind, oh, I wonder when this will stop. I know I have personally. Okay, nothing has changed. They worry about the tithing. They worry about the way they look. They worried about getting the best seats and everything. But then they don't worry about being compassionate to their fellow believers. They don't worry about discerning the word of Yahuwah correctly. They don't worry about actually believing in Yahuwah. Some of them ain't even immersed. Okay? Again, looking good on the outside, but filthy inside. So I hope that you received a proper understanding of some of the things in these chapters, a deeper, more significant understanding. Like always, this webinar is being recorded as well as the previous ones. And if you would like, you can use this link to go to youtube.com and get to the Yahuwah Direct channel. Or you can go to the channel and put in Yahuwah Direct, just like this, no space, Yahuwah Direct, and it will lead you to the channel. If you would like to contact me via email to get an invitation to the live webinar, which is held every 4th day, that's Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or a comment or anything, you can write me at yahuwahdirect@yahoo.com. I am Ayana, and at this time I would like to say, may Yahuwah abundantly bless you and your family with his ahab, that's his love, and his shalom, that's his peace. Thank you very much.